Greetings, friends. Operational situation by the end of the 14th of May. Let's talk on this broadcast in more detail with you about the Kharkiv direction and about the Kurakhovsky direction, where we have the main changes, where active hostilities are taking place. Let's start, of course, with the borderlands of the Kharkiv region. Heavy fighting continues, namely heavy fighting. The enemy, despite the fact that there have been a number of quite positive statements since yesterday and during today. I would call them positive, that stabilization is close and so on and so on. But it is too early to talk about any stabilization, because according to the information that is available today, the enemy has not yet conducted the very reserves that he has concentrated in Oktyabrski, in the direction of the settlement of the Lipsha attack, and accordingly the new Volshanka-Shebekina in the direction of Volchansk. Nevertheless, he has already begun to pull up some of their strength. So far, it's not something significant, not something big, but still, including armored vehicles. It is important to note this point here, because we said yesterday that a minimum of armored vehicles will be involved. Now the number of armored vehicles is increasing. So far, this is not something large-scale, but let's look at the situation now. Deep. There are active hostilities. Together with the Lukians, we will consider this segment because in fact now the enemy. The main vector from the settlement of Lukians also goes to a small landing, which is located to the west or southeast of Gluboko. Well, actually, the main vector of attack is to advance further, to gain a foothold, I would say. To gain a foothold in this forest area, and to inflict the main blow on garden associations at the expense of basements already, which would allow them to get closer directly to the settlement of Lipetsk, which is key for them on this segment of the front. Therefore, there are active hostilities. The limits of the gray zone. There is a lot of visual information for today, but from what was obvious at the time of the broadcast. We reviewed everything before the broadcast itself. There is only a red and gray zone. Therefore, the gray zone is active hostilities without significant changes so far, but they are also pressing in a deep way. In a similar way, the situation here, of course, is not the same as, for example, in Lukiancy for the Russian troops. I mean, they faced just the same very serious defense from the Afu fighters, but still. They went into the settlement of Glubokaya itself and gained a foothold in most of it. So it cannot be said that it will be possible to effectively hold the defense due to the fact that today there are missile strikes, artillery strikes, air bomb attacks on the Kharkiv direction as a whole. Today, there are quite a large number of strikes in Kharkiv. There were strikes for more than an hour. A number of strikes were carried out with different frequency. To all this, and missile and air bombs, to all this, of course, this is Volchansk, this is naturally Lipsy and, accordingly, areas of active hostilities. Therefore, the enemy continues to carry out airstrikes. There are active hostilities. And let's move on to the Volchansk direction, where we will talk in more detail about the main changes. Let's make changes. The first changes we have are Bugrovatka, a red zone has been added. The enemy managed to enter, and where we spoke on the previous broadcast, they were present. There was a fire defeat by the Afu. The infantry was attacked by drone drops, but, unfortunately, there is information that Russian troops managed to gain a foothold in the forest area and active hostilities are underway. Although there are reports from the Russian side that they managed to completely take control of the settlement of Bugrovatka, there is no visual information in any case so far, and there is also no information from the fighters themselves, from the Russian side, that they managed to completely capture the Bugrovatka. The situation looks like this, and actually on the northern or rather, the outskirts of Bugrovatka, there is a small country village. He came under the control of the enemy. Well, the fighting is going on in the most affluent. This is the first vector. The second vector naturally ages. Plus, the old woman is adjacent to the crib. In fact, the separation goes along the intersections. So the enemy will definitely increase the pressure on the crib, later on the old woman, that is, both in the locality itself and attacking from the forest. Active hostilities continue. And we turn to Volchansk. Here and in even more detail we will talk. There is a lot of information. First, the Russian side reported that they managed to occupy the territory of the Volchansk Meat Combine. Well, actually, its location. This is the first one. Yes. The second point is that it was officially reported from our side that there is no information, there is no confirmation that Russian troops managed to capture this territory. But so far, I repeat, we have no visual data. So far, there are words that can be interpreted ambiguously. Let's follow the changes. So, the first one. Footage was published today where enemy assault groups, already considerable assault groups, but just the same large assault groups, enter Volchansk itself. Naturally, fire damage was inflicted on them, and, in principle, reports have already been received from a number of people that there are shooting battles. It is no longer reported that on the outskirts, but somewhere the enemy is trying to run. Well, in general, the forces that are being attacked are no longer the ones that we stated from yesterday to today. That is, Drug, yes, there are 2 people, 5, 7 people, no, it's dozens. Actually, the first area. The second one, well, I hope you can see it on your screen, that is, groups of 20 and 30 people are already coming in quite a lot, large ones. Naturally, all necessary measures are taken by the AFU, fire damage is inflicted, artillery strikes are practiced by dropping drones. Let's look at the changes to make it more clear, and a gray zone has been added. But the enemy, as you and I assumed, most likely we had a small landing, because active hostilities were continuing. Most likely they were advancing along it. So it turned out, and part of it went into the red zone. As for Volchansk, at the moment, at the time of the broadcast, there is no information from our side, nor from the Russian military. Military, that they managed to gain a foothold. I mean visual information. Previously, it was possible to discard it again, but to discard it into the forest itself, that is, northwest of Volchansk. Therefore, we cannot state that the situation remains unchanged. Unfortunately, the enemy is still advancing. Well, in this segment, you do not forget that the settlements of Tavolzhanka are located, where the main reserves and Shebeks are concentrated, but they are in principle located nearby. So the enemy has a short shoulder that we attack, and this creates more difficulties. If there is a logistics route in the direction of Liptsovsky from Oktyabrski, along which is already being shelled regularly, drone activity from the AFU, then this new Volchanka is just right next to it. Therefore, there are some advantages of the enemy in this segment. And one more thing, a gray area has also been added. As you have noticed, we have a small ledge in the eastern part, the northeastern part of Volchansk. So, according to the AFU personnel, infantry was dropped into the positions of Russian troops, but it was a Drug group that was able to escape to the northeastern part. So far, we are adding a gray zone and a conditional route as they moved from Plitanovka. Well, we briefly said on previous broadcasts that they would try, but then I would have said more in order to strengthen the flank position. But I did not assume that they would advance this way to attack. But it's still not an assault group, it's a Drug. Well, it is clear that it distracts attention, it drags forces, of course it disperses the number of drones. It is more difficult for drone pilots, and the number of artillery strikes is scattered from our country to the positions of Russian troops. Therefore, the situation with us, a number of sites remain on a very large refinement, and, unfortunately, by the evening, we state that the enemy continues to assault, actively attacking. It is actively attacking. If we speak for the Volchansk direction, this is Volchansk itself, firm 2 directions. In the south of the Gothic, active hostilities continue. Bugrovatka, we have a number of positions for clarification, and clarification is still getting old. Because there is different information, I can't confirm it yet, I can't refute it. But you probably have already read that you allegedly entered a locality, there is no visual data yet. We are more focused with you, of course, on visual data, because, don't forget, there is a lot of misinformation going on right now. The head of Gorbudanov, Kirill Budanov, made a number of statements, where he said that within 3 or 4 days, there is a chance of stabilization, there is a chance that we will drop it. Perhaps this is due to the fact that some forces are being transferred, some reserves, or some kind of equipment. I'll say this, everything will show time, as I like to tell you lately, because the forecast is now on. Taking into account all the nuances, it is extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult, and, let's say, a thankless task. They will call you initially, and the dog according to the result. And then they will forget if your forecast was correct, but negative. So there's a lot of negativity so far, I'll tell you that. Plus, the strikes on Kharkiv are continuing, massive. And, in principle, it is not only about Kharkiv that we need to talk. The whole area, the border areas, are under very heavy artillery fire from the enemy. To all this, there are reports both from our side and from the enemy that artillery strikes are intensifying on the border with the Sumy region, the Sumy-Kursk region. There are a number of statements from the enemy that allegedly they can start. This artillery preparation is underway and they can start offensive actions. We talked about this on the previous broadcast, and actually Kirill Budanov himself, the head of the GAR, said about it. That their main blow could be just the same in the Ukrainian direction, although less forces are concentrated there. But this is such a moment. The main goal of the enemy is just the same, to pull part of the forces to the Kharkov and Sumy directions. Moving on. Then we have Pokrovskaya and Kurakovsky directions, we will talk for them. It means that we have the northern flank without significant changes. Active hostilities continue in the same way in the Arkhangelsk region. As for Novoalexandrovka, the positional nature of the fighting. Although we have not talked about this area at all for the last 2 broadcasts, because in fact it is possible to repel from the Afu. All attacks were reflected, absolutely everything, so we do not fix the changes. But if we are talking a little further south, the Novopokrovsk situation is a little more complicated. Novopokrovskaya, Umanskaya, not Tailova. Novoalexandrovka Solovyova stably, but succeeds, the enemy attacks stably, the situation is stably difficult. But it is possible to repel absolutely all attacks. Which, unfortunately, cannot yet be said about the positions, as we have said with you, Novopokrovskaya, not the Tailova site. Let's start in Uman. There are active hostilities, which the enemy is doing now. So, as we can see, there was a fairly strong defense in Uman itself. It was even possible to counterattack and throw back Russian troops from a number of positions. Now there is unverified information, but for now we will conditionally leave it, also in the eastern part, that the Russian troops failed to gain a foothold, not only in the central, but also in the eastern, so we are checking it. But the enemy has now not changed, but added another vector. This is an attack to the south, which we talked about. We added a gray zone on the previous broadcast. So according to the data that we have today, I mean the visual shots of the Strons, the enemy came close to Batuli Street. That is, approximately this area, circled a little to the north of the gray zone. In the direction of the intersection, naturally attacked. Previously, it was possible to repel the attack. But in any case, we are already stating that the enemy is starting to push just the same in the southern. On the southern outskirts of the settlement of Umanskaya. Therefore, I used additional forces. In addition, there are attacks conditionally in the direction of Yasnobrodovka, here more specifically, the forest belt, along which they are already carrying out some movement. It is still too early to say that the enemy has the opportunity to gain a foothold in the near future, but in general, let's just say that so far it is still too early to talk about stabilization in any case. It's early because there are active hostilities, and where the enemy rests on the defense, he tries to bypass it immediately. As is the case with Amansky. Tailov's pony was asked to comment because there are a lot of reports that allegedly Russian troops have already managed to completely gain a foothold before the road that we said on the previous 2 broadcasts. That the fighting is actually on the road, that is, in no case will I say, I do not deny the information that the enemy is present. Moreover, I told you on previous broadcasts, he is already present in the gray zone, that is, he comes in. He acts, if we say, occupied by small assault groups, but within the gray zone by the road, he really is. Whether he will be able to gain a foothold, we will state tomorrow on the daytime broadcast. Active hostilities are continuing now. Plus, there are attempts to transfer forces. The forces, as well as with the armored vehicles of the mechanized brigade from Pervomaysky to Nottailov, in order to conduct attacks on a larger scale, just the same on the remaining part of Nottailov, well to the south, and prepare for that. They do not want to prepare, but they want to have some reserve in case they manage to move south to the Domaka beam and the Stavkov cascade, in order to try to move south of the beam in a short period of time and, accordingly, in the direction of Novelsky. So far, there are active hostilities. Now I would say more. We are not talking for Tailov. And we turn to Krasnogorovka, the last section of the front, which we will comment with you. It will be a short, as you understand, broadcast, small compared to others. What is happening now? I will update the map by about 10. It's too early to say yet, because there are active hostilities. There are a number of points of disputed information. There are where the enemy attacked, plus shots from the enemy that he strikes. Where he conducts artillery preparation, which areas where he will attack in the near future. There are still a lot of controversial points. But let's look at the situation. Our main focus on the previous two broadcasts was that it leads to Kirov Street from the school district from just the same two directions. Previously, we state that the enemy is present in this area, not at Kirov Street itself, but a little to the south. There is also a small street. And these 6 houses, which are located previously in this area, are now present to the enemy. This is the first area. The second area is a little more western for us. They are also pressing in the direction of farms, that is, there are a number of attempts to advance from the territory of the Krasnogorsk refractory plant, including, that is, it is not only small assault groups, there are no attacks and mechanized brigades with the support of armored vehicles, including those same turtle tanks. By the way, they have already managed to knock out at least 3 tanks. Were they completely destroyed? Not yet. The first one was delayed, as you remember, the second one was also delayed, the third one was still under Krasnogorovka. It's worth it? In any case, the turtle tank that possessed. This is a very important point, which I will say, because I had a very serious RAP system, very serious there in different ranges. At least 5 were hung up by a single system. Today, there are a lot of reports going on in general about Russian RAP systems, and a fighter of the Aidar battalion. Stis Osman reported that this creates some difficulties in the Chasibyar direction. They are using the RAP system much more these days. The Russian troops have used it. Accordingly, our drones are not always effective, let's say less effective than before. Of course, they continue to work, it all depends on the frequencies and so on, and so on. A lot of artillery in this case will now depend on artillery. When drones are jammed, naturally we fall for it, as they say. Therefore, the enemy and on this segment of the front in the Kurakovsky direction, in the city of Krasnogorskovka, also contribute to these advanced RAP systems, attacking, and therefore use armored vehicles on this segment. Well, that's if we're talking in the direction of farms. And not only in the direction of farms, if we speak geologically for the street. This is the last segment that we comment on Krasnogorovka. Armored vehicles are also involved, that is, the enemy is just due to these advanced RAP systems and some of their effectiveness, which are available today, and are already being used on the front edge like this strength. Although, if we are talking about yesterday, we commented with you on the moment that there was an attack on the Limansky direction of 10 armored vehicles from the Russian side. I published a video in my Telegram, which means 5 tanks, 5 armored vehicles, and all of them were shot down, destroyed as a result. Therefore, of course, it is not always all effective. There is efficiency. Sometimes a key is selected with drones with non-standard frequencies. But this is a separate point, as they say, about their availability. The number of this drone. Artillery fragments sealed up these RAP systems, if we are talking about simple tanks with visors, or if it is a turtle tank. It is a little more difficult to disrupt the operation of this RAP system there. Well, in any case, these are all nuances. The enemy, we state that they are now using armored vehicles at the forefront. It was used to storm the city. Therefore, the situation remains difficult. It's still pressing along Centralnaya Street, that is, to the north. Centralnaya Street is not only geological, where we indicated Lomonosov Street, naturally, in this case, when he has already received a number of positions south of the street. Along Geologicnaya Street south of Centralnaya Street, plus already positions that are north of Centralnaya Street. He tries to push firm to directions, and the situation on a number of sites remains to be clarified. But here I would say more now the enemy is aiming at the ledge to close it. Well, and to the west, the Red Corns are also pressing. Activity remains very high.